all living beings are part of the cycle of birth, aging, sickness, and death. Death is not just the end of a life, but the beginning of a new one. This is the endless cycle of samsara, birth and death. Every breath we take in is life, and every breath we let out is like death. But in Buddhism, death is not something to fear. It is not the end, but a transition. Death leads to rebirth, transforming from one form into another, from one life into the next. Today, we will reflect on death and rebirth, and the never-ending cycle of karma and its results. Let's start with a question many of us may have asked. Where do we go after death? Where does our soul go? In Buddhism, death is not seen as a final end, but as a transformation. The Buddha taught that when someone dies, their physical body breaks down, but their consciousness, or mind stream, continues its journey. This journey is not random, but shaped by karma, our actions, words, and thoughts throughout our lives. Karma is the link between this life and the next, between now and the future. When someone dies, their body returns to dust, but the mind stream does not disappear. It moves on to a new body, continuing the cycle of rebirth. This rebirth is not random. It is guided by the karma we have created. The Buddha used the example of a flame to describe this. When a flame burns, it doesn't just go out, it transforms into energy. In the same way, after death, our mind stream doesn't vanish, but changes form, continuing into another life. This process goes on until we reach enlightenment, ending the cycle of birth and death. People often ask, why are some born into wealth while others are poor? Why are some happy and others suffer? The answer lies in karma and cause and effect. Every action, word, and thought leaves an imprint in our karma, and this karma guides us to different realms after we die. If we live a life filled with compassion, wisdom, free from greed, anger, and ignorance, we will be reborn in better realms. But if we live with ambition, hatred, and cruelty, our karma will lead us to lower, more difficult realms. Karma and cause and effect are not mysterious or distant ideas. They are evident in daily life. When we plant good seeds, we harvest good fruits. When we plant bad seeds, we get bad results. This is true not only in this life, but also in future lives. Where we are born, the family we grow up in, the circumstances we face, all are the results of past karma. Every event, every relationship in our lives is created by these karmic connections. Buddhism describes 6 realms of rebirth: hell, hungry ghosts, animals, fighting spirits, asuras, humans, and heavenly beings. Hell is the lowest realm, full of suffering due to bad karma. Hungry ghosts are beings tormented by endless hunger, driven by greed and attachment. Animals are born into ignorance and instinct. Fighting spirits, asuras, are beings full of aggression and competition. The human realm where we live is unique because it has a balance of both happiness and suffering. It is also the best realm to practice and escape from the cycle of rebirth. Finally, heavenly beings are those who have gathered great merit, living in joy and pleasure. But even in the higher realms, beings cannot escape the cycle of rebirth. Only through practicing the Buddha's teachings can we break free from samsara and reach nirvana, a state beyond suffering, beyond birth and death. To escape the cycle of rebirth, the Buddha taught the Noble Eightfold Path. This path leads to enlightenment, helping us overcome suffering and break the cycle of birth and death. The Eightfold Path includes right understanding, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. Each of these steps helps us train our mind, speech, and actions to align with wisdom and compassion. As we practice, we gradually purify our mind, letting go of greed, anger, and ignorance. Eventually, we reach a state of clarity and awakening. At that point, death is no longer something to fear, but simply a transition to freedom. Death and rebirth are natural parts of the cycle of samsara. We cannot avoid death, but we can prepare for it by living a meaningful life, creating good karma, and practicing diligently. In doing so, we not only live fully in this life, but also create a solid foundation for future lives. Remember, nothing lasts forever. Everything is impermanent. And in this impermanence, we can find freedom and peace. Death is not the end, but the beginning of a new journey, a new opportunity to learn, to grow, and to reach enlightenment. So, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment, as taught by the Buddha, is not something far away or impossible to achieve. It is awakening, the deep understanding of the nature of suffering, impermanence, and non-self. When we realize that everything in life changes, that everything is born and dies, we no longer cling to things. We no longer hold on to the illusions of the world, and from that, our minds become lighter and more peaceful. The Buddha once said, "In this life, nothing is permanent. Birth, aging, sickness, and death are natural truths. When we accept this truth, we suffer less and fear death less. Instead of worrying about the end, we focus on living a meaningful life, preparing ourselves for the journey our mind will take after death. Enlightenment means understanding karma and cause and effect. We know that every action, word, and thought has consequences, not only in this life, but in future lives as well. Therefore, we must live with compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom. Every action we take should come from love, from understanding, and not cause harm to others. So, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment, as taught by the Buddha, is not something far away or impossible to achieve. It is awakening, the deep understanding of the nature of suffering, impermanence, and non-self. When we realize that everything in life changes, that everything is born and dies, we no longer cling to things. We no longer hold on to the illusions of the world, and from that, our minds become lighter and more peaceful. The Buddha once said, "In this life, nothing is permanent. Birth, aging, sickness, and death are natural truths. When we accept this truth, we suffer less and fear death less. Instead of worrying about the end, we focus on living a meaningful life, preparing ourselves for the journey our mind will take after death. Enlightenment means understanding karma and cause and effect. We know that every action, word, and thought has consequences, not only in this life, but in future lives as well. Therefore, we must live with compassion, mindfulness, and wisdom. Every action we take should come from love, from understanding, and not cause harm to others. When our minds reach enlightenment, we are no longer controlled by worldly desires. We no longer fear death because we know it's just a transition. We no longer get attached to material things, status, or fame, as we understand that these are all impermanent. We start to see life with more calm and peace. Difficulties and challenges no longer bring us suffering or despair, but are instead lessons for us to grow spiritually and move closer to liberation. Liberation in Buddhism doesn't mean escaping life, but living in the world without being bound by it. It's a state of ultimate freedom of the mind, where we no longer cling to anything and no longer suffer from desires, ambition, or worries. When we are liberated, we live freely and peacefully, no longer trapped in the cycle of birth and death. Let's reflect together. If death is a natural part of life, why should we fear it? If everything in life is temporary, Why do we hold on to meaningless things? Instead of worrying about the future or being stuck in the past, we should live fully in the present moment. Let's turn every moment into an opportunity to practice, to cultivate compassion and wisdom. Let's live in such a way that when death comes, we can smile and welcome it as a friend, as another chance to continue our spiritual path. The path to enlightenment isn't easy, but it is possible. It begins with understanding the impermanent nature of life, living with compassion and wisdom, and not clinging to anything. We can't change the past, but we can live fully in the present to create a better future, not only in this life, but in the lives to come. Enlightenment is not some distant goal, but is in every action we take. It's in mindfulness, in love, in forgiveness. When we let go of greed, anger, and ignorance, and live with compassion, we are already walking the path of enlightenment. Ask yourself, how have I lived? How have I practiced? What merits have I accumulated? How many people have I helped? These are the questions we need to reflect on to prepare ourselves for death and rebirth. We don't know when death will come, but that doesn't matter. What matters is how we've prepared our minds for the journey. When we live a mindful, compassionate, and wise life, we no longer fear death. We know that when we let go of this body, we are simply continuing our journey, another chance to practice and move closer to liberation. So don't worry, don't fear death. Live fully, practice diligently, and when death comes, greet it with peace and serenity. We don't die, we just continue our journey, an endless journey in the cycle of rebirth. But with practice and enlightenment, we will step by step free ourselves from this cycle and reach ultimate liberation, where there is no more birth, no more death, and no more suffering. Always remember, in this endless cycle of life, only one thing is eternal: enlightenment. When we reach enlightenment, we are no longer bound by the impermanence of the world, no longer caught in the cycle of birth and death. We live with peace, freedom, and fulfillment, with no more fear, no more suffering. Homage to the Buddha Shakyamuni.